What's up, YouTube? My name is Caden, and you're watching Gas at Garage. In today's episode, we are going to be working on my brother's Go Kart over here. The Predator 420 that's on it is currently not running right. Today, I'm going to try and figure out why it's not running properly, and I'm also going to fix a problem with the steering. Alright, so this engine has been having some weird running issues recently. It will start, but it only runs on choke and you can hardly rev it up. And before that, when it started running badly, it was surging really bad, meaning you'd be going full throttle, but the governor on here would just be surging back and forth, causing the RPMs just to go up and down like crazy. And over time, this thing just became harder to start. So I put a new carburetor on it, but that didn't fix the issue. And it has spark and it has enough compression to run. So we're gonna take this carburetor off and take the head off to see what other issue this could be. So I'm gonna take this air box off. Take this breather line off, remove the spark plug cable. So I'm pulling this thing over and I can feel that it does have compression. So I'm also going to see if we have possibly a bent push rod or a valve that's not sealing properly, because sometimes the engine will have enough compression to run, but it won't have enough compression to run very well. So I'm going to pull this head off and I'm going to take a look at the valves. So when you pull the fuel line off, make sure you pinch it off with something, otherwise you'll have gasoline spilling everywhere and we don't really want that. So now I'm going to remove this throttle plate. So these are 14 millimeter bolts on here, and they are torqued pretty tight. Yeah, they're torqued pretty tight. I'm gonna go get a ratchet. These are torqued very tight from the factory. You always take this off in an X pattern. So we have our cylinder head here, and looking at it, I don't really see anything wrong. I don't see any evidence of a blown head gasket. Now I need to try and see if either one of these valves are leaking in any way. It seems like they're sealing pretty well. They don't look bent or anything like that, and they don't look like they've hit the piston. So I'm going to check our head gasket here. And it does not look like it has been blown. But I do notice that there is a little bit of oil inside our cylinder here. So it looks like possibly what could be wrong here is we might have bad piston rings, which causes two things. You get too much blow-by, which is when all the compressed gases inside the cylinder get blown past the piston rings around the outer edge of the piston here, because the rings may not be sealing properly. And what that can also cause, if it gets bad enough, is oil will work its way past the piston rings and get into the cylinder, which will make the engine run bad. And sometimes it'll smoke and sometimes it won't. Because if it's just a very tiny bit of oil, it won't really cause much smoke, but it'll still cause the engine to have running issues. So we may be looking at bad piston rings here, which is going to mean I have to take this CVT off, drain the oil, and take the side cover off and unbolt the rod to get this piston out. And the push rods are not bent, which is good. Now, when I open up the side of this engine, I'm also going to take a look at the timing on the cam. I highly doubt it's messed up, but it's always possible, so it can't hurt to check that either. All right, so we have our side cover off here, and there is a ridiculous amount of just sludge in the bottom of this engine. Probably because the oil was way overdue to get changed. And you can really see it in the bottom of the side cover here. Just all this nasty gray sludge in here. So once I put this thing back together, I will be putting new oil in it. But I'm gonna take the balance shaft right there out so I can unbolt the rod and replace the piston rings. All right, guys, I have our piston right here, and when I popped it out of the cylinder, I wasn't holding it, and it actually flew across the room and hit the floor. So there is a slight little dent right there, but it's almost non-existent hardly, so it probably won't make a difference, hopefully. I don't know if you can really see it right there, but a little bit of a dent. Now, to replace these piston rings, I'm first going to just kind of pop them off like this and then work them around. There's top one, second one. Now, these top two rings are for compression, and then the bottom one right here is the oiling ring. That is supposed to prevent oil from getting past the cylinder or past the piston into the cylinder. So here's first one, second one, and then you got this waffle ring, they call it. It's like this funky looking perforated ring. So we have our new rings here that I ordered, and these are actually a little bit thicker, which is slightly concerning. So I was taking a closer look at these piston rings here, and I noticed that they were a little bit thicker than the original rings here. So as of right now, they won't fit in these top two spaces here. And I also noticed that the ring gap on the original piston rings here is a lot larger than it should be, because the ring gap should be right about there. But that is obviously way larger than what it should be. So that is a compression loss, which could be the reason why this engine wasn't running properly. But as for these extra thick piston rings, what I'm probably gonna do is just take them on a flat surface with some very fine sandpaper and sand them down to where they are thinner and they'll be able to fit in that gap there. But I don't really recommend doing this because I'm not sure how that's going to affect the performance or longevity of these rings. But I'm just going to do it anyway, kind of for science. And honestly, it probably shouldn't be a problem because the rings are kind of sealed in these little gaps here with the cylinder. So I'm going to go ahead and sand these down and also do a little research on which way they go and which one goes where. All right, so after a good bit of sanding on these rings, I finally got them to the right thickness to be able to fit on the piston. So there's two rings here. One of them has a silver edge to it. This one is going to go on the top of the piston right here on the first slot. And then the second one is going to go in the second slot. And then the lettering on it, that basically just tells me to put the lettering facing up. So it's going to go like that, not that. So I'm going to start by putting on this corrugated ring right here, and it goes in the bottom slot just like this. And then we've got our two oil rings that go around that corrugated ring. They're very thin and they go on either side of it. These can be a little bit tricky to get in here. There we go, we got the first one on, and then there's the second one. Now for the two compression rings, this one has the silver and this one has the lettering on it. So I'm going to put the one with the letters on first. And then the top one can go on last. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piston ring compressor and oil this thing up so it's nice and lubricated to go into the cylinder. I'm also going to oil the cylinder up a little bit. Put this on like this. And when you do this, you want to leave the piston skirts exposed a little bit so you can get the piston started in the cylinder. Have it compressed. Now there's an arrow right here, and you're going to want to have that pointing down. So let's get this in there like that. And then I use the wooden end of a mallet, and I want to make sure my crankshaft is in the right position. All right, there it goes. All right, now I need to bolt on this connecting rod. All right, so we have our rod cap here. I'm going to take a bit of oil, that, and then it's going to go right onto the other end of the rod there. We have our two rod bolts. Now I'm going to get a torque wrench and torque those down to 26 foot-pounds. All right, so we've got our torque wrench here. And first I'm going to set it at about 20 foot-pounds so I can torque these evenly and you don't get too much torque on one side versus the other. You want to just do it a little bit on each side, alternating between bolts.
There's 20. Now I'm going to set this to 26. All right, there's our 26 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to bolt the head back on and torque those bolts to 25 foot-pounds. Then I didn't adjust the valve lash since I had this head off, but I am going to adjust it again just to be sure. And I'm also going to put the side cover on and make a new gasket with some Ultra Black. So I finally have this engine all put back together other than the exhaust. And then I have the CVT and chain and sprocket all hooked back up. But right now I'm going to fix a problem with the steering, because both of the tie rods on either side are adjusted all the way in, but the tires are still towed out quite a bit. So I think what happened is one of these tabs here got bent out, which threw off the alignment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see which one of them is bent, and then I'm going to cut it with the grinder and then weld it back in the proper position. Now that I've finished fixing the steering and putting the engine all back together, now I can try and start this engine. So I'm going to turn the fuel on, put choke to start. I'm letting the fuel drain into the carburetor here. Gosh. That's a lot of fuel. Alright, some fuel leaked out, but I'll fix that later. I just want to see if this thing starts. Alright, I'm going to spray some starting fluid in here. I've got the spark plug out here, and I'm going to test for spark real quick. Does not look like we have spark. So I'm going to work on the wiring a little bit and see if I can fix this. Alright, so I moved some wires around, and now this thing does have spark. So let's try and start this thing again. It sounds like it's trying to run. I'm not sure what the squeaking sound is. Alright, that's a good sign. Alright, so my brother's going to take this thing for a test drive now that we have the engine running. That thing seriously needs a muffler because it is so loud. Oh yeah. Alright, so that engine still needs a little bit of tuning, but I think it's pretty good for now because we're actually leaving to go to Mini Mayhem with Cars and Cameras up in North Carolina tomorrow. So that thing should be awesome. But I gotta end this video here, guys. So thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.